Please welcome Paul and Mark.
Back to the show.
Yeah.
You guys, for those of our viewers who aren't up to speed, can you give them the Cliff's Notes versions of the Dune Shack controversy?
Sure. So there's 18 dune shacks out in the backshore of Provincetown and Truro. If you haven't been on a dune tour lately or gone hiking, you might actually not know they're back there. But they have a history that predates the National Seashore, way back before the 60s, that all the way to the Coast Guard era on those beaches. And they're in the hands of a few different kinds of people. There's nonprofits that run sort of a weekly lottery system, which is how a lot of us have been able to go out there at different times in our lives. There are some that are still in the hands of families who had them before the seashore was even created. There are others where there's sort of this like caretaker, as generations age, people step into the gap, they wind up taking care of a place for a really long time. So, Paul Tasha took care of Harry Kemp for his entire second half of his life. So Paul Tasha has taken care of Harry Kemp's shack since the 50s. The Park Service is re-renting 8 of these dune shacks, almost half of them. And there's a lot of controversy about the terms of those leases that they're offering. They're really short, Memorial Day to Labor Day. They're allowing people to compete on price, which is an option that the park has, but they didn't have to take that one. And they're also, what I've been reporting is there's this agreement that was developed among all the parties 10 years ago, where a dozen public meetings, a whole lot of process, lawyers, national park people, like they really sat down and figured out how it would be the most fair way to, let the public have an opportunity to sort of compete for these, but also really reward people who have experience, who have knowledge, who care about the cultural values and the traditions here, who care about public access and the arts. And they came to this big compromise on how this ought to work. And the park, what I've been reporting, has kind of just junked all that public work and is just using their standard lease that they use on a hot dog stand. So that's what we've been writing about, and that's why the select boards of Provincetown and Truro have objected to this RFP, and they're complaining to the Park Service about it.
I think there's, to zoom out, if I may, to zoom out a little bit on this into the context, there's a bunch of intangible values that I think are related to a lot of the changes that are going on all around the Outer Cape in terms of preserving the character and the community in the face of sort of corporatization and money. The dune shacks, they're a squatter settlement, but they're in public land. So they've always been in public ownership, most of them. There's a few that were privately owned. And so the public has always had access to them one way or another. When we were a community without institutions, there were many ways through the community connections that you would have a chance to experience the dunes. And the experience is the thing that is most valuable to all of us. Now that, once they were designated a historic district, the institutions had to come in, and they're, the government has its way of working. But what I think is the most important value right now is having a conversation between the seashore and the community, the larger community, about how to preserve those values. I have an experience of the dune shacks from the 90s. It really launched me as an artist to be able to spend time there in the off season in the dune shack in a collaborative group of artists out there. And I wonder if that's still going to be possible, with this arrangement.
Well, if they have their way, it sounds like for these 8 shacks, you wouldn't even be able to stay in it after Labor Day.
So there's a question about, the terms of the RFP set hard dates on the season. And I've been told that's because you can't appraise a structure according to appraisal methods without a hard date based on a tourist season. And that, don't worry, they'll be available in the off season, but there's no guarantee of that.
And what they studied 10 years ago was not that lease. Right. They have a whole process where, because it's a historic district, there's a lot of rules around how you act to make sure you're conserving not just the building, but the values that made it a historic district, right? It's not just architecture that made this worth saving. They studied all of the culture of the artists and writers, but also the long-term residents. They're all in a balance out there. And those leases that they came up with 10 years ago have terms on who should win the leases, how you should decide. There is, in the agreement, you could use a hybrid use, where, say, this is my shack in the summertime, but in the winter there's going to be this artist, and in every January there will be a writer's program, and then it'll be back to my shack in May. Like, that's a legitimate use in what they studied 10 years ago. Totally forbidden in what they're doing now. I asked that question. No nonprofit use, no programmatic artist and writer use. Like, all of that is like very clearly forbidden in the current leases. They want something very simple and very controllable and very sort of cookie cutter. And so all the agreements they came to try to protect the values of the district have been ignored, which I kind of think is illegal, and that's what I've been reporting. Like, who has the standing to tell the park, you studied this under a bunch of laws, and you can't just neglect what you studied. Like, you have to do the thing you said you would do.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you have access to whoever it is that's actually making these decisions? Have you talked to somebody who's like, well, I, don't live there and don't know much about the community, and this was my decision to do this?
So 3 different agencies and a senator's office, all of their communication departments know me really well now. Mm-hmm. But you can't actually talk to the people. They fob you off to their communications department, and then you get this very massaged language that doesn't answer your questions, and no one will actually talk on the phone because that's like too risky. So you're doing it all over. It's a mess. Uh-huh. But when you try to push, especially the oversight agencies, there's a state historic officer who has the power to ask questions about why are you not doing what you said you would do. Mm-hmm. And there's a federal historic agency that has the independent power to ask questions like, why are you not doing what you said you would do? And they're like, they really don't want to have to be involved.
They actually don't have a basis for objecting yet, because you really have to see what the outcome of this leasing process is going to be and who gets the shacks and how they maintain them before we see if we're losing the character. Right now, it's all just kind of lease language. It's formalized, but that's why I think that we need to have more of a public conversation with the people making the decision before the leases are finalized, so that back in the 90s, the relationship between the seashore and the town was very contentious. And there were issues like off-road vehicles, dogs, nudity, even the use of the landfill, the transfer station, the airport. That was all up in the air. And there were conflicts everywhere. And the seashore, to their credit, I'm really kind of proud of this time when I was part of the seashore. They came to the town. They worked very hard, George Price, Maria Burks, and others, to try to get a relationship with the town and establish some common ground. And they did it. I think they did improve that relationship. And now it's time to actually reinforce the relationship between the seashore and the town with some face time.
Uh-huh. Well, it seems like there was a relationship, and they're abandoning that relationship with this new idea of leasing them, correct?
I mean, a lot of what I've focused on in the reporting is they did a huge amount of work. Seashore people and community people involved in the Dune Shacks, the nonprofits, they met together over and over and over to hammer this out. And they're just throwing all that work in the trash. And it's really dismissive of all the people who did it, from the community side and from the staff side. And they're, the decision's going to wind up being made in Philadelphia, which is the regional office. Mm-hmm. One of the things they negotiated 10 years ago was someone from the seashore would be an advisor when they go review these leases, to sort of help them filter through, like, no, this person can back up what they've said. They do know how to do this. Right. This person is using fancy talk. They don't. You probably can't just say, oh, I have a big budget, I can pay staff to do it. Like, actually, the staff that you can hire won't know how to get a Winkler crane out. You can't actually work that way. And they're not going to send a technical advisor. Stacey Ferguson, the woman who's running these leases, has told me, no one from the seashore will be in the room when they're deciding these leases. That's just one more of those agreements they broke from 10 years ago.
Wow.
I mean, I wouldn't say that they've thrown everything in the trash. I would just say that, like a lot of things in town, the generations have turned over, and there's new people, and they just don't know the history. They don't have the public memory of the work that's been done, even though it's only 10, 20 years ago. Very few people at the seashore were involved at that time. So they need to be part of the community. Obviously, they have a responsibility to the values of national parks, but they also have part of the creation of the Dune Shack district. I encourage everybody to go in and read the historic designation of the Peaked Hill Bars Dune Check District because it's full of history. It's full of information about Harry Kemp, Hazel Hawthorne Werner, Eugene O'Neill. That's the origin of the character of the Dune Check District, is these artists, people seeking a connection to nature. It's not real estate.
Right.
And one of the things people will talk about, when I'm calling sources who were involved on this back into the 90s, is this is not the first episode in this story. This has been going on for decades in various kinds of turf. First, it was lawsuits about who really owns it. Then there was, is it going to be a historic district? Then there was a whole ethnography decade where it was trying to find out if there's a traditional community who should have certain rights or not. And then after that came this sort of peace agreement where everyone comes to the table and hammers out these terms for how we're going to move forward.
Right.
And to ignore the peace agreement and treat it like real estate isn't just a coincidence, probably, and it's probably not just some, administrative, oops, somebody signed the wrong document. It probably, the sources I talk to will insist, and they may be right, that it should be seen as, one more chapter in a really long-running conflict about these dune shacks.
The proposals were already due, right?
No.
No. So Thursday, June 15th, is when site tours will be happening out at the dune shacks.
Okay.
The applications are due July 3rd, and they can start awarding leases pretty much right away after July 3rd.
Wow.
So it's a really short timeline, especially for government agencies. Provincetown Select Board moved really fast. Churros did as well to sign letters objecting to all this.
Uh-huh.
By the time you can turn a ship like the state historic officer to pay attention, it could be over.
Wow.
So some of it is, the most recent thing I reported is these two agencies, the state and the federal one, probably need to be asked overtly, probably by the select board or other people who have some standing, to get involved, probably in a letter, specifically saying, please do this, XYZ, please do it now.
Right.
Signed, everybody. Because without really clear direction, it all happens very fast.
One of the criteria being judged on the applications is the ability and knowledge to upkeep the dune shack itself. How could you argue that anyone besides the people who have been doing it for the last 50, 60, 70 years would be better at it than them?
It's an interesting question. Well, it's only one of the scoring things.
Right.
And you could say, well, I've maintained this cabin in the woods, or,
Okay.
The idea that they're so unique that you have to have this specific knowledge may not be that widely held. That may be obvious to us,
Right.
but the person in Philadelphia reviewing it may say, well, they had a cabin in Denver, that's cool. They know
Did
how to
that
do
cabin in Denver get buried by sand once a year?
Maybe they
Probably
built
not.
a dozen cabins in Denver, or maybe they built a dozen cabins in Aspen. We
Right.
don't necessarily know what kind of, I have the resources and the wherewithal to maintain things because I've built, not to fearmonger, I built 100 cabins in Aspen. That could be competitive.
Yeah.
And your question kind of illuminates the challenge for anyone who's applying for one of these leases, because how will they know what they need to prove in order to show their experience out in the dunes?
And also, do the people judging the criteria know? You know what I mean?
We don't know who they are,
Right.
so and they are distant. They may not have any experience in the dunes here.
Do you guys know anyone who's applying?
I haven't, no. I mean, we do know that almost everyone who has a dune shack will be applying to get another 10-year lease on their dune shack. We have not heard from anyone who has said they're applying. The thing is, the 10-year ago agreement still lets the public apply, still lets all kinds of people say, actually, I think I would be really good at this, and I would like to do it, and I'll do this and this and this. But it judges them on, public access and arts and culture and traditional knowledge and commitment to these lists of values in the cultural district. And then with that in mind, may the best application win.
Did you mention the bid, the money bid?
Yeah, there was no money in the original version.
Right.
The idea that you could bid up.
I think that's the biggest fear that has been brought on by this is, and I imagine they're not being forthcoming about how each category will be weighted, and I think people are afraid that if you're going to be able to maintain it, if you're going to respect the arts and history of it, are just lip service, and it's just whoever's going to give the most money to the Park Service. I think that's the fear people are
And it's an
having.
option. They didn't have to use that one.
Right.
You know, they used the very basic Code of Federal Regulations lease, of which number 6 is, if you want, you can have people bid up the rent, but you don't have to. Like, they could have done this without that.
Right.
It really puts the applicants in a tough spot because what you need to do to apply is prove that you have the resources to maintain the shack, to pay for it, to do renovations. But how much is that? Do you throw down, triple the assessed value in order to ensure that, do you need to have that money in the bank for a 10-year period or just an annual period and show your income? It's like applying for a mortgage or something. Wow.
And as resources, I have 4 adult children and 4 nephews, all of which spent summers out here and all of whom care about this place. And we know we have this pool of free labor who's, skilled, is that the resources we're talking about?
Can you argue that? I'm sure people have their family, people involved in the upkeep of it, but can you argue my 15-year-old nephew comes down and digs it out every spring? Can you argue that?
Well, I mean, and the truth is most of the work out there is free labor, skilled labor, barn raising style stuff.
Yeah. And
there's no reason to expect that that's not going to be laughed out of the room in favor of, me and my construction company.
Yeah.
They really can't be maintained without a kind of the ability to call on the community. Hey, come out and help us dig. That is the tradition. It's woven deeply into the history of the shacks. And I so much respect for the people who do that.
What needs to happen next?
Well, so it's a very short amount of time. The select boards could probably take another crack at these 2 agencies, the state historic preservation officer and the federal one, and see if they can ask really hard questions, because those agencies can demand answers. They can actually, if they file a strong enough objection, get a stop work under this 2008 agreement between the Park Service and the 2 agencies. And they could theoretically put a halt to the RFP while they ask questions about why it's such a departure from the 10-year ago agreement. So that would be cool.
I wouldn't even put it in such harsh terms. There needs to be a conversation. There needs to be more information, first-hand information from local to local, before there's a commitment made that could change the future of these. So they aren't even hard questions. They're easy questions. What are the criteria and who's going to be judging them, and do they have the right information? And do you have a connection to the community, and will there be community access in some form or other?
Thanks so much for coming, guys.
Everybody, ask your select person to reach out. Yeah. It's going to take people like that, you're saying.
Yeah, there's meetings on Monday and Tuesday, I believe, in both towns, and it probably will. I don't want to make it sound like a magic bullet, 2 of the best select boards which we have, they're doing great, and these are hard agencies to move. That letter could get sent, and it could still go to the circular file in Washington.
Yeah.
But it's on our side here in these towns. We know that this is a local commitment to keep these values alive of this historic district. We know it's important to people, so we can at least do that part, and then it comes to a lot of hopes and prayers that the historic preservation officers decide that it's worth their time to care.
I think it's also important to say that the Peaked Hill Trust and the Community Compact, the 2 nonprofits that have shacks, will continue. This doesn't affect those, and that personally, I think that model has worked so well to give so many people access to this experience. Right. People are thrilled to be out there for a few days. Yeah. So why can't that model be extended to additional shacks? But I don't want people to think that they're shutting down the dunes. The nonprofits are still there and need to be supported.
Of course.
They are. Although I'll add, one of the sources I spoke to said, listen, if they can force what was long-term residential use into a Memorial Day to Labor Day box and take what used to be, decades of access and people coming out every winter to do maintenance work and put it in that confinement, this source argued, I don't think you can assume that they couldn't do that to the nonprofits 5 years from now. That April to November, which is the season that, that we get to participate in lotteries. The last time I was out in Fowler was November. That may or may not survive 5 years from now. If they can change the terms on the long-term people, they can change the terms on the nonprofits too.
It's essential to keep that access. And for people out there that haven't had a chance to go out there, I'd encourage them to apply to those lotteries, get a chance to be out there.
It's magical.
It really should be something that more of the community can experience.
And at the very least, take a Dune tour. I've taken a few, all with Paul, and just the knowledge you get to learn, you will leave that Dune tour with a full appreciation of the Dune Shacks and everything they've offered the town for the last almost century. So
Yeah, they're really special places, and that's why people are so wound up about them, and that's why it gets so much attention, not just this year, but over the course of decades from this place. So.
And you can also check out coverage that Paul has been writing some really incredible articles covering all of it for the past month, and I'm sure you have some others coming up in the pipeline as things develop.
Yeah, we're not done yet.
Okay, so grab a copy of the Provincetown Independent. It covers incredible stuff, but specifically the Dunes, they're doing a really great job with that. So
Thank you for your time, gentlemen, and
Thank
your hard
you.
work.
yeah, and we'll keep in touch to make sure we keep our viewers abreast. So
Awesome.